Okay, I believe we can start. So good morning, everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have 18th of August. It means the peak of holiday season. But nevertheless, I can see many distinguished guests here. And there is a good reason for that, because today we have a special lecture. On behalf of the military faculty of the War Studies University, it's my great honor to welcome representatives of the military with Lieutenant General Krzysztof Król, Brigadier General Mariusz Fritz, Brigadier General Mieczysław Wieniek, not in active service, but still within the military, former Chief of Staff of the Polish Armed Forces, General Rajmund Andrzejczak. Sir, nice to have you here. I warmly welcome representatives of science, industry, media, students, all of you present here. Most of all, I would like to address special words to Professor Azar Gat, who had traveled from Israel and Tel Aviv University to be with us. He is a world-renowned scholar whose remarkable contributions to military science have shaped and inspired research across the globe. Today, we are delighted to have the opportunity to hear his insights firsthand. We look forward to an engaging and thought-provoking lecture that will enrich our perspectives and spark meaningful discussions. I would like also to warmly welcome Professor Gat's wife, Mrs. Dana Schotham. Madam, nice to have you here. Before I invite Professor Gat to deliver his lecture, a few words about our guest. As an introduction, will be presented by Dr. Łukasz Przybyło. Thank you.
Shalom. I would like to introduce and show you 2 or 3 slides about our guest today. Professor Gat is researcher of war, nationalism, ideology, professor at the Tel Aviv University. I had opportunity to visit him in his room in university. This is when somebody says that scientific research is difficult, it is not. Yeah? You probably have to have some money for the plane ticket and for the hotel room. But then if you just ask your colleagues from science departments all over the world, they will gladly help you and talk with you and give you an interview. And exactly that happened. I never knew Professor Gat before, apart from reading his books. 2 latest books are here. I brought them with me. And the mail discussion that we had was short, to the point, and we had a meeting which was fruitful for me. I have this interview recorded, and I used it in my scientific job. So research is rather very nice than difficult in that way. Since 1987, Professor Gat has been in the faculty of the Department of Political Sciences in Tel Aviv University, when he is currently a full professor. He was also visiting professor in Oxford, Yale, Stanford, Georgetown, Ohio State, Freiburg, Munich, and Constance. So what we can have today is intellectual debate with the leading scholar when it comes to war and ideology. Professor Gat is author of 12 books. Some of them I put on the screen here. Full list is here. I will leave it for a while just for you to read this and understand that we have a really exceptional guest today. Today is not the only day we will have Professor Gat in our university. We are starting today with the lecture, Is the Decline of War a Delusion? But next Monday, we will also have a chance to listen to the lecture, which will be on technological revolutions in war from 19th century to Ukraine and Middle East now. So Hopefully, all of you that are present today will also could make it next Monday. Yeah. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. All right. So my subject today is the decline of war and delusion. If you have any question during the presentation, please do. I mean, if something is not clear, otherwise we'll wait for the end. It's fine with me. Is the decline of war a delusion? Is there a decline of war? It now seems silly. You have a war in Ukraine just across the border and have understandable concerns about your neighbor. We have a war in the Middle East around Israel, with which you are also very familiar. The clouds of war are gathering around China, as we all know. So the notion that was popular in the wake of the Cold War, that war was declining, is now seen by many as a recurring delusion. We know we have had it in the past, before the World War I, after World War I, after World War II, and it now seems as a kind of repeated delusion. The so-called realists in political science, international relations. How many of you have studied political science, international relations? All right. So you are, if you are familiar with the realist school, they now say, we told you so. War is as present as ever. And we'd like to look at more closely at the evidence for this. So I'll start by showing you a map of today's world. Enter, all right. This is a map of today's world. What you see, it's colored by production per capita. That is basically by wealth. And what you see is that the world is divided into two very distinct spheres. One, generally painted in blue, the bluish colors is the developed part of the world. That is production per capita higher than $20,000. Not from oil and gas resources. There are not many that go above 20,000, even if they have gas and oil resources. But this is the general picture. The yellowish and reddish and brownish colors are those under $20,000 per capita. Now look at these two spheres. One, the developed parts of the world is a complete sphere of peace. That is, there are no longer wars between states in these parts. There are no longer civil wars in these parts. There are no longer even the so-called security dilemma. That is, that I am afraid or scared of my neighbor because he might invade. All of these are gone within the developed parts of the world. So let's look, for example, at North America. Why do not Canadians fear an American invasion? Why not? The annexation of Canada by the United States would have been very worthwhile for the United States. Even, some would say, even more than a war in Afghanistan. And still, the Canadians have absolutely no fear of military invasion by the United States. Cultural invasion, yes. But not military invasion, or annexation, or loss of independence. Now look at Western Europe. Why do Holland and Belgium not fear at all a German invasion or a French one against all the experience of history? They do not fear it. They do not prepare for it. They didn't think this is possible at all. The same for France and Germany. Why so? Now let's look at East Asia. The three developed countries of East Asia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, none of them fear war with one another. Despite, even though they do not like each other much, especially not the Japanese, because of the legacy of former Japanese imperialism. But they do not fear a war with each other at all, nor with any other developed power. Only with, as we all know, with perhaps China or North Korea. The fact that Australia and New Zealand do not fear each other seems so obvious that we do not even stop to think why this is so. So, again, within the developed world, no more war, no more civil war, no more security dilemma, fear of war between them. On the other side, the less developed parts of the world, under 20,000 per capita, in all of them, war is still a reality. The fear of war is still a reality. The state of war, in the sense that Hobbes defined it, that is, that war, even if it doesn't occur, may always be a possibility. Within these parts of the world, war remains a potential and an occurrence in all its forms. That is, between states, within states, and the security dilemma. That is, they fear each other. All right? And the darker the shades, the more the option, the potential of war is there. Now so today's war occurs only in the less developed parts of the world, either between states in these parts or between these states and states from the developed parts. All right? So now we would like to explain why this is so. Why is it that within the developed parts of the world, we no longer see war? All right. So let's start with something that all of you who studied, political science, international relations, are familiar with the concept of the long peace. That is, no war between the great powers since 1945. Small exception, the Korean War, which was China's ticket of entry into the great power club. So today, 80 years of no war between the great powers. And you don't have to be a genius to understand why there is no longer war between the great powers, because of the bomb, all right? Because of nuclear weapons. However, the second longest war in the great power, the second longest period of peace in the great power system occurred before World War I. That is the peace that occurred between 1871, the end of the Franco-Prussian War, and the beginning of World War I, 1914. So 43 years of no war between the great powers. Again, small exception, the Russian-Japanese War, 1905 to 1905. Again, Japan's ticket into the Great Power League. But in any case, in Europe, where most of the great power existed, no war between the great powers for 43 years. And the third longest peace between the great powers occurred just slightly earlier. That is, between the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 and the Crimean War in 1854. So 39 years of peace. 3 periods of peace, three periods of peace, long peace, each of them growing longer. The first one, the second one, and the current one. The first two without the bomb, before the bomb. So the bomb cannot, the nuclear weapon, cannot be the reason for the first two periods of long peace. Obviously, we remember that in the middle, we had an exception, two actually. Not just an exception, but Himalaya-size exception. That is the two world wars here. So what we want to explain is this phenomenon of long peace, which occurred since 1815, and also the exception, the two world wars. First of all, you can see from here, first of all, the question is if the long peace phenomenon is something special. Perhaps there has always been. There have always been periods of prolonged peace. And here you see, we look at the 18th century for an example, the wars between the great powers, the five great powers of the classical European balance of power, that is Britain, France, Prussia, Germany, Habsburgs, and Russia. All right? So you see the wars that involved at least two of them during the 18th century. You see that there is nothing like a long peace phenomenon before 1815. Afterwards, we have three of them, and each is growing longer than the previous one. All right? So we now want to understand why this phenomenon of long peace. Here, this is even more striking. Wars that involve at least two great powers fighting each other. This is the 18th century, 1700 to 1815. This is the period between 1816 and 1914. You see that Britain in the 18th century was involved in 55 years. That is half of the time it was involved in war with other great powers. In this period, only 2 years. That is the Crimean War. France, 58 years of this period was engaged in war. In the 19th century, only 4 years. That is the Crimean War and the Franco-Prussian War. Prussia, Germany, 21 years. We count only from 1740, when it became a great power. Only 3 years in the 19th century. That is the war against Austria, 1866, and the war against France, 1771. Austria, 42 years in the 18th century, only 2 years in the 19th century. Russia, 14 years. Again, we discount its war with Sweden, Turkey, and Poland, only 2 years in the 19th century. So we see a sharp decline, a dramatic drop in the number of great power wars. And you remember that great powers are the greatest belligerents of history, a sharp drop occurring after 1850. Okay, so again, we want to explain the change. Why the change? Why the radical drop in the number of great power wars after 1850? And what most people give as an answer intuitively, they say modern wars are so much more costly, so much more deadly, so much more destructive than earlier wars. And this answer, even though it sounds intuitive, is wrong. Pre-modern war was at least as deadly destructive, as expensive as modern war. Of course, relative to population, to wealth, and so forth. So just to demonstrate the point, let's take a few examples when we have relatively good statistics, because you know that for pre-modern times we have a problem with the accuracy of reliability of numbers and statistics. So if we pick just a few examples, so for example, in the Peloponnesian War, the war between Athens and its empire and Sparta and its allies, for the Greek World War, between 431 to 403 BC, it's estimated that Athens lost about 30% of its population, much of it to the plague. But the plague was caused by the war because the population of Attica was evacuated into, and they lived into the city, and they lived in makeshift tents there and dwellings of all sorts. But this was the case anywhere in pre-modern wars. That is, epidemic disease followed the armies. So what we have here is a 30% loss of life, which is more, sorry, which is more than Germany's losses in the First World War and the Second World War combined. Another example. In the first 3 years of the Second Punic War, that is between Rome and Carthage, the first 3 years is between 218 to 216, Rome lost, Hannibal War, Rome lost in its disastrous battles with Hannibal, lost some 50,000 of its 200,000 military manpower. That is about a quarter of its men in military ages. Again, this is similar to the Soviet Union, the terrible losses during the 4 years of Barbarossa. Last example. During the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, it's estimated that the population of Germany, which was the main theater of operation of war, that the population of Germany declined by between 15% to 30%. Even if we take the number 15%, it's more, again, the Germany lost in World War I and in World War II put together. In terms of economic cost, remember, the destruction of cities, the destruction of the countryside was part and parcel of pre-modern war, much more than now. You didn't need artillery and bombers for that. And in terms of the economic pressure, pre-modern war easily pushed the population below subsistent level. Think Yemen or Ethiopia now. So it's not the case that that modern wars have become more deadly than or more costly than before. Here, just a reminder. No, here. So just to remember what pre-modern war looked like. I was just telling Lukács here on our trip here that as a child I was an avid reader of Henryk Sienkiewicz, translated into Hebrew, mind you. So if you want to remember what pre-modern war was, just Just read Delusion by Fire and Sword and all that. Why do we have the, even in modern wars, most of the killing was done not by sophisticated technology. Remember that the 3 million Soviet prisoners of war that were killed by starvation and by exposure to the elements in the first 6 months of World War II. Or remember that the genocide in Rwanda was done with the most primitive weapons. Okay, you don't need sophisticated. Most cases of genocide during the 20th century were carried out with the most primitive technology. So why do we have this intuition that modern wars are so much more destructive? We have this intuition because obviously we know that modern weapon systems are so much more effective, so much more destructive. What we fail to consider is that the increase in effectiveness affects not only the offensive power, but also defensive power. They balance each other out. So, for example, we have mechanized armor, we have defensive electronic countermeasures. So the offensive and defensive developments balance each other. Just one example. The Israeli Air Force, since the mid-1980s, it's now 40 years, has lost only 1 aircraft in battle. 1. And as you know, it's not because of a lack of operational activity, including, most recently, over Tehran in Iran. And it's not because of a lack of the most sophisticated and dense anti-aircraft systems, for example, in Syria. And still, only 1 aircraft in battle in 2019. Why? Because of the superiority of defensive electronic, mainly electronic, equipment. All right, so all this is intended to serve the point that modern wars are not more destructive, more costly, more expensive than, more destructive than pre-modern wars. So why the decline of war? And the answer was actually noted by thinkers during the first long peace, such as Auguste Comte and Saint-Simon and John Stuart Mill in the 1830s and 40s. They saw that 1 decade after the other passes without war, which was unusual. And they realized what the causes for that was. And the cause that they pointed to was that the world had entered the industrial age, something new. And here I'd like to explain what the meaning of this historical transformation, the greatest historical transformation in human history since the transition to agriculture. How it translated, what the effect was. And the effect was a steep exponential. We all understand now exponential after Corona. We understand what an exponential is. You can see that wealth per capita was more or less static until 1800. And ever since, for every country that has gone through the process of modernization, what we see is an exponential growth in wealth. So the richest countries in today's world are about between 30 and 50 more richer, wealthier than the wealthiest countries in 1800. So the wealthiest countries in 1800, say Britain or the Dutch Republic or Holland, had a production per capita in today's terms of about $2,000. Right? So this is an exponential growth. What does it mean? It means that until 1800, since wealth was, the levels of wealth were static, remember Malthus, every improvement in productivity is taken up by more children and more mouths to feed. So until 1800, the wealth was static. And the only question was how we are going to divide it. Within societies, between societies. This is known as a zero-sum game. In order to have more, we must take from others, whether it's the subjugated classes within our society or our neighbors. No other way, practically, in principle. Whereas now the pie was growing, it was growing fast, and it was growing mainly by economic investment at home and by trade with other industrial powers. So it's not that war has become more expensive in modern times or more destructive. It is peace that has become so much more profitable. Economic wealth comes from investment at home, from which the cost of war is regarded as a destruction, as a wasteful destruction from increasing wealth. All right. So this changes the balance between peace and war. Even if people cannot conceptualize it in the same terms that I've just done, they feel it. They feel it. It's not their interest to engage in war. Life is good. The future looks brighter than the present. The wealth is increasing all the time. Why waste life, money, on such an unproductive occupation such as war? All right. So now I owe you an explanation. So if all this is so good, why the two world wars? As we said, this is a monumental exception to the general trend. And basically, there are 2 points that I'd like to make in this regard. First of all, it's the rise of modern nationalism. There is an argument between scholars on the question of whether nationalism is something new or it has always been around. I'm more in favor of the second proposition. But in any case, it's clear that nationalism has become a much more potent political force in modern times, for reasons that we shall not discuss here. So people's desire to break away from the rule of other empires, to unite with their fellow countrymen in an independent state. All these became a very potent force leading to conflict and war. So remember, for example, that the large majority of the wars that separated the first long peace from the second longest peace, that is, these are the wars of German unification. And before that, the Franco-Austrian War of 1859, that led to the unification of Italy. But again, the wars of German unification, all of them revolved mainly about national aspiration, national independence, national unification, which is a very potent force that often is much stronger than the economic factor here. And it remains so today, in today's world and later. So nationalism and the efficacy of nationalism is one reason why we still see wars, especially in the less developed parts of the world. Because in the more developed parts of the world, there is a growing recognition of the right of secession if a minority, the ethnicity within the states want to secede. So, for example, in Scotland or in Canada or in other places, or in Belgium, if they ever get to this point. So, all right, you can secede. Nationalism is one reason. And nationalism also contributed to the economic factor. And this is because from around 1870, the world that had previously, the developed economies that had previously exercised free trade, were beginning to withdraw from free trade and erect protective walls, tariffs around them. Why? Because all these economies, that is Germany and France and Japan, all of them wanted, the United States, all of them needed protective walls at the tariffs, especially at the stage of economic takeoff. Otherwise, they could not compete with the developed British economy. So they all erected tariff walls against British products in order to allow their own industries to emerge. And this had another consequence, that is, from the 1880s onward, we see the return of imperialism. Imperialism had been considered dead by the middle of the 19th century, and suddenly it returned, and people think that it returned because it was profitable. It was not, and people at the time knew it was not profitable. The saying at the time was that imperialism doesn't pay. And the greatest objection to imperial expansion came from the British Treasury. They knew that there was no money there, just more costs. You keep some bureaucracy there, you build. So they did not want colonies, not the British Treasury at least. Just again, to remind you, the two largest imperial powers were Britain and France. Both of them declined in economic significance between 1870 and 1940. Britain had 25% of world production in 1860, only half of that in 1940. It continued to grow, only the others grew more, because they were undergoing industrialization. France, the same. Second largest imperial power. By 1914, it almost dropped into the second rank of great powers because it fell behind in terms of industrial production. Far behind Germany. They were almost equal in 1870. And they were less than perhaps a third of Germany's economic might in 1940. So imperialism doesn't pay. It didn't pay. People knew it. So why imperialism? The answer, short answer, we are covering a lot here. I fully realize this. The short answer is if the world economy was going to be closed rather than open, that is, you could only trade within your country's tariff walls, if you then size mattered. Let me explain. In an open economy, size of states does not matter. That is, the citizens of Luxembourg can be as rich or even richer than the citizens of the United States. There is no connection, or there is little connection between economic borders and political borders. However, in a closed economy, closed by tariff walls, there is a huge advantage to size. The citizens of Luxembourg cannot produce cars and televisions and oranges and everything. The United States perhaps can. So once the world economy seems to go, as it seemed to go in the late 19th century, in the direction of closed economic spheres, it became the interest of each power to grab whatever it can as fast as it can. Why? Because now these territories are worth very little. But maybe in 50 years or 100 years, after we develop these territories, they might become part of an economic powerhouse. And then we shall regret if we didn't catch as much as possible when we could. So there was a snowball effect here. Everybody rushed in to catch whatever they could. And this was the main source of the tensions that were injected into the European great power system, which ultimately, after 10 years of crisis between 1904 and 1914, led to the First World War. Basically, Germany felt that it was left behind in terms of colonial expansion. And all the rest more or less followed. I'm simplifying, but not that much. All right. As a result, as we all know, after 1945, led by the United States, the West has taken steps to lower tariffs to the point of them being practically abolished on manufacturing goods. So from about 40% average in 1945 to a few percent just before Trump. This was done partly because of economic reasons. That is, if an open economy is more efficient, we know this from Adam Smith onwards, and for political reasons. Say in Europe, if everybody has access to the markets, everybody is able to sell goods. If this is the case, there is no need to occupy territory. We can just trade. All right. So, yeah, we have no time for sex. I'm sorry. So maybe later. This does not mean that we don't have huge problems brewing. One is around China. China now has production per capita of about $13,000. What happens when it doubles? Will China liberalize, become more pacifistic? Maybe. Will it just become more powerful and more able to project power? Probably. We do not know. This is the greatest political question of the 21st century. In the meanwhile, you know, things in East Asia, around China, both in the East China Sea towards Taiwan, and less also in the South China Sea, where China claims practically the entire sea to itself. Both of them look like a train wreck in slow motion. That is, can erupt in any moment. So this is one problem that we have, and the other problem that we have is this one. You are familiar with it. And the third problem that we have, people talk less about it, but perhaps here you are aware of the problem, is the prospect of unconventional terrorism. The most promising avenue to this is biological. We knew this long before Corona. Biological because it's that much more accessible than nuclear weapons and almost as lethal, if not more so. So this is another reassuring trend that might explode any moment during the 21st century. And last, we have the Trump factor. You see the rise of tariffs. They change all the time, so don't the 25% is now. So obviously it's changing the international system as we know it. Nobody can tell where this will lead. And obviously we see the closing of the open trade system. The main question from the perspective of this lecture, is it going to change the fundamentals? Will nations in the developed parts of the world return to war? Or will they again fear each other? My own answer, no, but it's an open question. Okay, good. I think I'll move to questions.
Yes. Maybe I'll start because, and then I will follow on with the questions from the audience. The decline of war in the developed countries, of course, we do not use force against each other. There is no fear of Dutch people against Germans, but still, maybe Germany does not have to use armed forces because of financial, informational, cyber, international relationship, foundations, influencing, voting, etc., etc., etc. So, so you don't use armed forces, but still, the societies of countries are maybe afraid of influences in other way than armed forces.
Sure. I mean, the human relations have not ended. No history. It's not the end of history yet. But there is a great difference between a fear of war, we all know what war means, and concerns about, countries, obviously, exercising the economic prowess, influencing other countries, influencing them not only in terms of economics and politics, but cultural. We have this concern, say, in the Muslim societies of the Middle East, the resentment of what they regard as cultural influences that erode their own traditions coming from the West. So the same, there is an ideological war now between Russia and the West, between China and the West. Each of them emphasizing its own the traditions as very sharply contrasted now in the last few years with Western liberalism. So yes, history has not come to an end. What we can say is that all this is very different from war. We know what war means. Clashes of interests, of views between people remain. But this is different from war.
So if we want to fight war, we should develop the world and make it richer.
Pardon me?
So if we want to get rid of war, we have to develop and make the world richer.
So yeah, so practically this is an optimistic view. The more people join the prosperous, affluent world, the more they are, they do not see the point of war. There are polls, I don't know how the situation in Poland now is, but there are polls all across the European country. You ask them, will you defend your country in case of Russian invasion? The answer of the majority, no. All right? So ideally, the more the world develops, and the more parts of the world that are now undeveloped become developed or reach the level. But we are not there yet. We are a long way from there. And obviously there are all the other questions.
So you are optimistic about the decline, or
long term? But you know what John Maynard Keynes, the economist, said. In the long run, we are all dead. So before the long run, we have to live through the short and the medium run. And as you probably feel, the short run does not look that promising.
Okay, so any questions from the audience?
Yes.
What about the other factor, like the alliance, the coalitions, because all those rich countries are like putting one, not on the NATO, but also there are other alliance coalitions which exist, and
So it's not much different. Obviously, coalition, if you are going to have a war, so coalition is important. It's obvious. But it doesn't affect the main point. The main point is that there are no military coalitions within the developed world, one facing the other. There are coalitions of parts of the developed world, or of the entire developed world against enemies. NATO used to be like this. We have now question marks hovering over NATO. So coalitions are obviously very important. Military coalition, if you are going to have a war. They do not affect the picture within the developed world. There is no coalition, military coalition, say, of France, Belgium, and Holland against Germany, as we used to, including Poland. Okay? All of them are concerned to a degree about the prospect of Russian aggression. Right?
Well, because you came from a very important part of the security, John Matre, I will ask you about how you see the three important points, three systems. One is China, which is probably long-term issue, using your terminology, about the confrontation US and China as a superpower in the future, mostly economically, technologically. But Taiwan is a topic everywhere. So it's like a ground for a future prediction of potential implementation of war as an instrument of politics. Second point is Israel, which is confrontation state to state, Israel and Iran, and state to no-state actors, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and everybody else. It's also, pretty hot today.
Sure.
And then we have a very much, in our perception, conventional confrontation, Russia and Ukraine. So if you compare short-term, medium-term, and long-term, so how it works as a definition of using war as a politics.
So obviously there are many questions involved in each of these foci of conflict. But as far as my general argument is concerned, so if we are talking about China, I wish I could say that China, we are talking only long term. We are talking short term, you know, because Xi Jinping, the leader of China, is reported to have, to have ordered the military in China to be prepared for an invasion by, I don't remember, 27. Okay. Whether or not there is going to be an invasion, whether or not there is going to be a blockade. In any case, a confrontation of catastrophic size in terms of its effect on world affairs. We don't know. It looks like, as I said, it looks like a train wreck in slow motion. Hopefully it will not get there, but nobody can tell if we will or will not. And long term, also remains the question of China. If it enters the club of the developed world, will it affect its belligerency? Will it affect its political order? We don't know. The honest answer is that we do not know and we cannot tell. So this is for China. In the Middle East, what we have, you know, in somewhat vulgar terms, Israel is situated in a bad neighborhood. So we are on this front line between the developed world, that with production per capita higher than 20,000, and countries of the Middle East that, without exception, have failed so far in embarking on the process of modernization for various reasons which we will not go into now. And on top of that, the Arab countries themselves have been founded on shaky foundations and are reeling now. It's not clear where they are going. Some of them are disintegrated. And these non-state actors throughout the Middle East are a problem in themselves. And even more so if they or any other non-state actor acquire a non-conventional weapons. As I said, my own preference is biological weapons. Because we are living through the biotechnological revolution. And what was regarded as science fiction only 30 years ago is now a reality. And the ability to synthesize pathogens exists in thousands of laboratories around the world. In my view, it's only a matter of time until terrorists, somewhere, we don't know where, somewhere will acquire the potential and use it. Now, for Russia, and so again, as you said, it's a conflict between states. And Russia is a non-developed economy. It produces nothing. It lives on the export of energy and minerals. We know this. Putin's greatest crime, long before the invasion of Crimea and Ukraine, other parts of Ukraine, was that during his first decade of reign, he relied exclusively on the exports of energy, which was, the price was very good during the first decade of the century. Now, the Soviet Union had very large strata of engineers and technicians. In principles, they could have been converted, into a successful industrial economy. None of this has happened, and all this human capital has been wasted. Some of them came to Israel, and we profited a great deal from it. So Russia has nothing to offer economically. And therefore, the only thing that it has, the only leverage that it has on its neighbors is the traditional Russian and Soviet coercion. That's what we saw where was it? In Armenia, in Georgia. Sorry, that's what we see. That's what we are seeing with Ukraine. All right. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
Okay, if I may, I would like to ask you about your approach, your methodology to identify the long period of peace. Do you think this is also acceptable or applicable to assess the future? If yes, to what extent, based on your, let's say, theory, we can, let's say, assume that there will be potential conflict between the powers in the future and...
So there is this saying that theory does not stop things from happening.
All right, okay.
So what we can say, I think, is that we have a broad historical background of about 200 years at least, in which we discern trends and try to explain them the best we can, the most convincing, hopefully, as we can. What will happen in the future? Like all human prediction, it's limited. It depends on if you look at the full half of the cup or the empty half of the cup. So we know that we have a pretty good ability to plan for the future, and we know that planning is, we are often surprised. So we can just analyze the underlying trends, and there might be other trends that will emerge. We don't know. We don't know.
All right, and the threshold you said as $2,000.
20,000 for affluent economies, for non-oil, and 2,000 is the richest in 1800.
So what's the number currently?
So for the United States is 65,000. For Germany it's 55,000. For Britain and Italy, and it's the mid-40s. Poland is also in the developed, and it depends. If you take PPP numbers, that is, which consider also the purchasing power parity, Poland is, for example, is much higher. So, but in principle, what we have is here. All right. What we have is where is it? All right. What we have is here. You see what countries are affluent. The most affluent are in dark blue, usual suspects. And all the blue and bluish colors, in principle, I exclude the Saudi Arabia and the other oil principal, even though they are also. We see that their main concern is economic development and economic modernization, which involve social modernization. So it's not that the rationale totally does not apply to it. It does, but less so than the fully developed economies for reasons that I partly explained.
Thank you very much, Professor Gata. Absolutely thought-provoking briefing. I have some doubts, and frankly, I have also my own opinion.
Yes.
Okay. If you look into these breaks in between the big wars, for majority of the countries in yellowish, amber, or whatever, that was also time of wars, because these great powers used others as a proxy and allow them to fight one with another. So first point. The second point is the guys in blue. I see Poland also one of these blue nations.
True, it's 1808, 2008.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could have brought, you know, more updated map of the world. Yeah, okay.
But my point is that these countries also try to change the world that is around, and not necessarily with peaceful methods. Libya, for example, France against Algeria, or in war in former Yugoslavia. Okay, just an examples. So from my perspective, we should add to your theory also this approach to change or influence the external world that is beyond these blue nations. Okay. So I'm looking forward to your comment. And the last one is related to Russia. Okay. As you are absolutely aware, this long-lasting peace after 1815 and then after First World War, that was the outcome of the agreement of great powers, because from their perspective, they achieved their national interests, and for them, they tried to preserve it.
You mean the Concert of Europe?
Correct. Correct. Therefore, it was in their interest to maintain the peace.
Right.
So Russia, as a great power, of course, we could say France, Germany, or Great Britain, they give up this idea of expansion, imperialism. Russia is completely different. This imperialism allowed them to be richer and richer because they exploited the countries they subjugated, frankly speaking. So unlike for those with their colonies far away, security, transportation, for Russia it was absolutely very easy and very cheap to maintain these countries like Poland under their control.
All right. So let's take them one by one. War by proxy. This is a point often made, but we should remember that the great power wars between themselves throughout history were A, the most frequent, and B, the most catastrophic, the most decisive. So how does proxies change the point here? You know, they were proxies even before. Something has changed. The most frequent and the most destructive of wars throughout history have declined sharply after 1815. So people talk about proxies, they talk about proxies during the Cold War, obviously, because we know why. They also talk about proxy wars in the sense that, you know, the British were fighting the Zulu in Africa rather than France, right? But we are not talking here about the same thing. The return of imperialism, I explained why, all right? So this is about proxies. Proxies are not an explanation why the most frequent and the most consequential wars in human history have so declined after 1815. The second point was wars outside. So as I said, developed countries do fight countries from non-developed parts of the world. They do. So wars in today's world, they occur either in the undeveloped parts of the world or between developed countries and undeveloped parts. And there are various reasons for it. One is, indeed, the threats to the liberal world order. Some of them are even humanitarian wars, like in Libya, like in the former Yugoslavia. You know, the Western powers have this weakness. They care about the humanitarian consideration. That's it. So this explains Libya. This explains Yugoslavia. The Americans, after the terror attack of 9/11, were obviously anxious about what was coming. Right? Some of the reaction proved, in hindsight, less fortunate, but we know the motivation. Right? So there are wars between developed countries and undeveloped countries. My country is now engaged in such a war. The third point was Russia. Russia, until the Crimean War, there was this so-called concept of Europe, when they focused their attention on suppressing popular and nationalist sentiments at home, and cooperated in this. After 1854, after the Crimean War, it struck Russia as a lightning blow that it was falling hopelessly behind. The problem of Russia after the Crimean War, poor Nikolai the First was still able to witness this. The problem was not that what marked it was not that it was happy in taking all in all meager profits from its less developed empire. First of all, Russia undeveloped, and the rest of it with differences, obviously. Its problem was its deep felt realization that it had fallen hopelessly behind the other great powers. And the entire course of Russian history between the Crimean War and World War I was how to balance this fundamental weakness, how to bring about an industrialization, modernization of the Russian empire without eroding and destroying the foundation of the regime. So it's not that they were happy with, with the spoil of the empire. Yeah, the Tsar and his family and the aristocracy enjoyed a decent level of life. But all in all, Russia was weak and behind and felt it very deeply.
So if I may, just one additional question, because I get an impression that it's a very much economy-focused brief, which is okay, very interesting, especially in Poland. 2008 was extremely important, not only because Georgia, but also Lehman Brothers, we have financial crisis in Poland, avoided. So today, I gotta find out on the internet, but today the GDP of Poland is equal to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Romania, and Moldova put together. But I'm not sure whether Poland is much more safer 2025 than it was in the past, 2028, or in the beginning of our transformation. And I will ask you,
I didn't say it was safer. I said it was safer from a German invasion.
Yeah, absolutely. That was. Right? But now the geometry changed.
And also from an invasion from Lithuania.
Yeah, historically.
Yeah,
including Sweden. Okay, but if I use the very ancient terminology and instrumentarium like Peloponnesian War. So Thucydides said that we have 3 reasons for war. First is very much economy oriented, which is interest, more or less. State has an interest to use the war as an instrument to make politics. But the two another are not absolutely close to reality and the numbers, very much emotional. So fear and honor. So if I'm looking China and Taiwan, looking Israel, especially Iran and all of the proxies around, and also more or less Russians as a imperial way of thinking, 2 another factors. So is the honor and the fear still triggers in the modern world.
So as you said, Thucydides puts it that the real cause of the war was Sparta's concern about the growth of Athens. This is known in international relations theory as the security dilemma. I don't know if you are going to attack me tomorrow, but the very fact that you are so strong frightens me. So I take steps. I might arm myself. I might strike first. I might do several things. A war that care only because of fear from the others. And this has been a recurring factor in world history, not only between Sparta and Athens, leading, among other things, as I said, to arms races. All right? Both countries arm themselves, even if they do not plan to attack, just because they don't know what will happen tomorrow. Now, this is, as I said, entirely gone within the developed parts of the world. Within, that is, they no longer fear each other. You no longer fear Germany. You have other reasons, but you no longer fear Germany. And the Belgium and Holland do no longer fear Germany or France, against all historical experience. So the security dilemma remains in those parts of the world in which economic development has not yet arrived, and they are not adjusted to the new logic of the system, which is we are all going to get richer anyhow. That's in a nutshell.
I have a question before I will turn the microphone to my colleague. So if the Western world or rich world will get debrutalized and will not be able to fight wars because the Western world or rich world will not be able to fight wars, then these red and yellow countries will simply invade us and finish the economic development.
Everything is possible. Whether this is likely, I'm not sure. Right? I think that as I said to some of you here before the presentation, I think that what your Prime Minister said sums the security situation of the world, or at least of Europe, in terms that are unparalleled. That is, to repeat, you know it better than me, why do 500 million Europeans need to beg 300 million Americans to protect them against 140 million Russians who for 3 years have not been able to gain victory against the 40 million Ukrainians? So I think that the concerns of the Europeans about Russia is understandable, especially because of the nuclear factor, because the only thing that Russia still counts is it is a nuclear superpower. But in other terms, it's weakling. We know that economically, its economy is the size of Italy's. So the concerns regarding Russia, and especially regarding the doubts regarding the American nuclear umbrella are understandable. Whether or not Russia can or would go further, I have my doubts.
Sir, Commander Krzysztof Pęk. I have a question concerning your theory. We know that resources are allocated in this or other way, right? And war is also a kind of a way of locating resources. So we observed that during the Cold War period, there was no war, in fact, no hot war. Nevertheless, the resources on both sides were allocated into
war means, right? And in terms of Soviet Union, they needed to allocate so many resources in the war, like, let's say, production, war-connected production, that finally the economy collapsed. How would you comment on that and this allocation of resources? And my second question concerning the minor wars in your theory. So we observed there were many small wars concerning great empires during the history. Even in terms of United States, after the Second World War, United States was engaged in many wars, not only proxy wars, but some small wars like in South Korea, in Vietnam, or I think Vietnam was even the most important one, really changing the society, undermining the status of the leaders. And there were some others, of course. They affected the United States, but they haven't made any strong decline in the economy. But in terms of, for example, Soviet Union, we had the war in Afghanistan, and it was the tipping point in terms of the Soviet Empire. We clearly observed that after this war, the collapse started. How does it relate to your theory of peace and war?
So,
Thank you.
in terms of resources, in an open world system, natural resources, for example, should flow smoothly. Now, during the Soviet Union, this was not the case. During the Cold War, this was not the case. All right, there were two separate economies: one the Soviet bloc, and the other the West and its satellites. And what we have today is, in some ways, beginning to resemble what we had there. That is a partial decoupling of the economies of very partial, of China and the United States, and especially in critical resources, as you mentioned, rare earth metals, advanced electronics, and other things. And this basically recreates what Adam Smith, the theorist and champion of free trade, wrote in his Wealth of Nations almost 300 years ago. He wrote that affluence, that security is more important than affluence. So he was all for free trade, unless security consideration intervened. And then he intervened during the Cold War, and they now begin to intervene with the exception, especially with the conflict with China. So in terms of an open global economic system, shouldn't matter. But the world is not divided only according to on economic lines. We have this rivalry, first with the Soviet Union and then with China. Now, by the way, investment in the military was one of the factors that led to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. But let's remember, the main reason was the total inefficiency of the communist economy. I don't need to tell you about that. All right? Yeah. The second point, yes, of course, there were a lot of small wars. I mentioned only great powers wars just to demonstrate the point. But what you see is a decline of war in all the developed parts of the world. All right? So small wars no longer occur anywhere in the developed, and all the examples that you gave were wars between developed powers and undeveloped powers, or between two undeveloped powers, not powers, small countries. All right? The decline of war engulfs not only the great powers, but all the countries of the developed world.
Of course, in your theory, you highlighted this economic factor, but even from the recent development in politics, leaders' personality matters. So if you take into account, for example, President Trump, he recently said about Greenland, that is part of Denmark, in line with international law, I will get it this way or another.
Yeah. So first of all, personalities matters, and since you asked, or people ask here, ideologies also matter. It's not that I think that ideologies do not matter, but look at the and we are not going to discuss here the relationship between ideology or the ideological superstructure and material. You had enough of that when you were younger. So we are not going to revisit this argument. Of course, there is an interaction between the two. But basically what we see is that obviously ideologies such as Nazism, which occurred in a relatively developed countries in terms of the early 20th century, and the same communism in not such a developed country like Russia. But the overall picture that we see is that war declined. That is, to a large degree, ideology followed reality. That is, people adjust. Now, regarding leaders, yes, obviously. And Trump is a big change. Whether or not he's going to annex Greenland by force, whether or not he's going to annex Canada by force, my prediction is not going to do so. All right? The fact that pronouncements go against every norm that has become customary in international law and in the relations between states goes without saying. Whether or not any of this would lead to an American military takeover of either Canada or Greenland, I don't believe it.
I think that we are to conclude your lecture, and I would like to give microphone to the Dean of Military Faculty.
At this point, one normally has two news, bad one and good one. So bad one is that the lecture is almost over, and the good one is, as we have heard, on the 25th we will have another one. So I would like to invite all of you for the next one. Professor, thank you very much for coming here.
Sex and war some other time.
And your interesting presentation. And let me to present you with a small coin. As you can see, there is General Piszema, you can see him on the portrait, and the statue is outside. It is one of the best Polish generals who fought here in 1939 when the Second World War started. So once again, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
you